So, this is what you traded it all for? A man who doesn't even want you. Arthur's voice cut through the noise of the charity gala. He stood there, in a borrowed suit that looked too tight in the shoulders, his eyes burning holes into me. The anger was familiar, but the pain underneath it was new. It was the pain of someone who finally understood. It's funny how life works out. You spend years praying for a win, for some kind of justice, and when it finally arrives, it feels nothing like you imagined. How are you all doing today? I hope you're somewhere comfortable, maybe with a nice cup of tea. Is it raining where you are? It feels like it should be raining. My name is Janet Henry. This is the story of how I went from crying over a past-due electricity bill to standing on this balcony, looking out over a city that felt like it finally belonged to me. It's the story of how I broke the heart of the only man I'd ever truly loved for a fairy tale marriage, only to discover my prince was in love with someone else entirely. And that the fairy tale was actually a business contract. But let me start from the beginning. Before all this. Before the diamonds and the empty promises. 3 years ago, I was 26. I believed love was enough. I believed it could pay the rent, fix a leaky faucet, and keep the lights on. I believed it was the secret ingredient in the cheap pasta we ate 4 nights a week. My life was with Arthur M. Jones, a man whose soul was made of music. Our apartment was tiny, always filled with the sound of his guitar and the smell of my attempts to cook something decent on a hot plate. We were happy in the way people are when they have nothing but each other. But having nothing gets old. It grinds you down. I loved Arthur. I loved his music, the way he'd write songs about the curve of my smile, or the way I hummed when I was washing dishes. But love didn't stop the eviction notice from being taped to our door. It didn't stop the shame I felt when my card was declined at the grocery store. One day, Jan, he'd always say, his fingers strumming a hopeful chord. One day this song is going to be on the radio, and we'll buy a house with a real kitchen. You'll see. I saw years of one day stretching out in front of me. I was a paralegal at a downtown firm, a job that was supposed to be a stepping stone, but felt more like a cage. My small salary was swallowed whole by our life. I was tired of being strong. I was tired of pretending that passion was a fair trade for peace of mind. Then I met David Scott. It was at a boring work function my boss dragged me to. He was different. Calm. Stable. He listened when I talked, his blue eyes focused and kind. He didn't talk about one day. He talked about today. He asked me about my dreams, not as if they were fantasies, but as if they were a business plan he could help me execute. He wore a simple watch, but I knew who he was. Everyone did. He was the tech guy who'd made a fortune before he was 30. He started showing up at the cafe near my office. He never pushed, never crowded me. He was just there. A quiet, steady presence. He made me feel seen in a way that wasn't about being a muse for a song. He made me feel safe. The first clue that something was off came a few weeks in. We were having dinner at a quiet place, and I reached across the table to touch his hand. He flinched. It was barely noticeable, a tiny, split-second recoil. He covered it with a smile, saying he was just ticklish. I laughed and brushed it off. A man like that, so put together, probably wasn't used to spontaneous affection. He was just a gentleman, I told myself. Respectful. He told me about the pressure he was under. His father had built an empire, and David was next in line to be CEO. The board is traditional, he said, swirling the ice in his glass. They need to see stability, a commitment to the future. The deadline was a big shareholder meeting just 3 months away. It was everything to him. I was living a double life. Polished dinners with David, then back to my cramped apartment with Arthur, where the air was thick with the smell of instant noodles and unspoken anxieties. The choice felt like tearing myself in two. One night, Arthur came home, his face shining. He'd gotten a gig. A real one. Opening for a well-known band. It wasn't a record deal, but it was a start. It was a flicker of hope. "See, baby," he said, grabbing me and spinning me around. "I told you. It's happening." I looked at him, this beautiful, brilliant man who still believed in miracles, and my heart broke. because as he was celebrating his first real step, I had already decided to walk away. The next day, David asked me to marry him, and I said yes. I went home and ended it with Arthur. It was the ugliest, most painful conversation of my life. I told him I needed more. I told him I couldn't wait for one day anymore.
I didn't tell him about David.
I packed my things, the sound of his silence following me out the door. I convinced myself I was making the smart choice, the adult choice. I was choosing a life, not just a love story. I had no idea I was about to get neither. The wedding was a blur of white flowers and polite smiles. It felt less like a celebration of love and more like a corporate merger. David's family was there, all pressed suits and careful expressions. I didn't know a single soul. I wore a dress that probably cost more than my entire college education, and I felt like a child playing dress up. David was perfect, of course. He held my hand, smiled for the cameras, and said his vows with a steady, convincing voice. I repeated mine, my own voice barely a whisper, feeling the weight of Arthur's silence from miles away. It felt like a ghost was sitting in the front row. We didn't have a honeymoon. David said it was impossible with the shareholder meeting, so close. Instead, we went straight to his house. Calling it a house felt wrong. It was a sprawling, glass and steel structure that clung to a hillside, overlooking the entire city. My old apartment could have fit into the master closet. That first night, he walked me through the echoing halls to a bedroom at the far end of a wing. It was beautiful, with a bed big enough for 6 people and a private balcony. I thought you'd be more comfortable with your own space to settle in, he said, his smile gentle. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. My room is just down the hall if you need anything. He said goodnight, and the door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the sterile, silent room. I sat on the edge of the bed, the expensive silk of my wedding dress pooling around me. A separate room. I told myself it was considerate. He was a gentleman. He was giving me time to adjust. But a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. This wasn't how a marriage was supposed to start. I had traded passion for stability, but I didn't realize that meant sleeping alone on my wedding night. I pushed the feeling down. This was the price. This was the deal I had made with myself. The next few weeks fell into a strange rhythm. We were perfect roommates. We had breakfast together every morning on a sun-drenched terrace. He'd read his business reports, and I'd read a novel. He asked about my day, and he listened. He actually listened. He encouraged me to quit my paralegal job. "You're brilliant, Janet," he said one morning, not even looking up from his tablet. "Wasting your mind on someone else's paperwork is a crime. Start that nonprofit you told me about. The one for inner-city arts programs." He meant it. The next day, his lawyers had the paperwork drawn up. He gave me a credit card with a staggering limit and told me to build my dream. And I did. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about money. I could focus entirely on something I was passionate about. I poured all the energy I once used to worry about bills into creating something real. And in those moments, I felt a deep, surprising gratitude for David. Our life was quiet, orderly, and productive. We were partners. We were a team. I started to believe that maybe this was its own kind of love. A calmer, more practical kind.
Then I met his family.
We went to Sunday dinner at his parents' estate. It was old money, the kind that feels heavy and judgmental. His mother gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and his father shook my hand like he was closing a deal. But it was his sister, Catherine, who put me on edge. She was sharp and perfectly put together, with eyes that missed nothing. "Janet," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "David has told us so little about you. Your whirlwind romance is the talk of the town." She asked about my family, my job, where I used to live. Every question felt like a test. "You must have swept him off his feet. David has never been one for spontaneity." I felt like a specimen under a microscope. I could feel her trying to find the cracks in our story. I knew, in that moment, that she didn't believe a word of it. She was looking for a weakness, and I had a feeling she would not stop until she found one. I left that dinner feeling shaken. The drive home was silent. When we got back to the quiet emptiness of her house, I found myself thinking of Arthur. I missed the noise. I missed the chaos. I missed the feeling of being held. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the dark house and saw a light on in David's study. I knocked softly and pushed the door open. He was sitting at his desk, head in his hands, the picture of exhaustion. He looked up, surprised. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," I said, stepping inside. "Big week." He nodded, running a hand through his hair. "The biggest. If this doesn't go well, everything my father built could be handed over to vultures." For the first time, he let the mask of calm control slip. He told me about the pressure, the constant fear of failing, of not being the son his father expected him to be. He sounded so vulnerable, so human. Not like a billionaire, just like a man who was scared of letting everyone down. I sat in the chair across from him, and we just talked. I told him about my own fears, about wanting to make my parents proud. In that quiet, dark room, we connected in a way we never had before. It wasn't romantic. It was something else. It was friendship. Real, genuine friendship. I felt a fierce wave of loyalty towards him. I was on his team. I would help him win.
And he did win.
The day of the shareholder meeting, he called me as soon as it was over. "We did it," he said, his voice full of relief. "I'm officially the CEO." That night, we celebrated. He opened a bottle of something expensive, and we sat on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. He was smiling, truly smiling. "I couldn't have done this without you, Janet," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "You were the key." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "We're a good team," I said. He nodded, his smile fading slightly. He took a long sip from his glass, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The silence stretched on for a moment too long. He finally turned back to me, his expression serious, almost pained. "Janet," he started, his voice low. "We need to talk. Now that this is over, there's something you need to know. There's a reason I really married you." My breath caught in my throat. The city lights below us blurred into a meaningless smear of color. All the little pieces of our strange life together, the pieces I had so carefully arranged into a picture of a respectful, slow-building marriage, suddenly shattered. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice small. David didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the skyline, as if the buildings held the words he couldn't find. "The board, my father's trust, they have clauses. Morality clauses, they call them. They're from another century, but they're ironclad. The CEO has to be a family man, stable, married, straight." He finally turned to me, and the practiced calm was gone from his face. All I saw was a deep, gut-wrenching exhaustion. And I'm not. The words hung in the cool night air between us. I stared at him, trying to make them fit. Not straight. The flinch when I touched his hand. The separate bedrooms. The polite distance that I had convinced myself was gentlemanly respect. It wasn't respect. It was a boundary. "You're gay," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, a sharp, pained movement. "Yes." A laugh escaped my lips. It was a bitter, ugly sound. "So what was I? What was this whole thing? A business transaction? Did your lawyers vet me like they were buying a new company?" The humiliation washed over me in a hot wave. I thought about Arthur. I thought about the life I destroyed, the heart I broke. For this. For a role. For a piece of corporate strategy. "No," David said quickly, stepping closer.
Janet, no.
"It wasn't like that. I mean, it started that way. I needed to find someone. But when I met you, you were different. You're smart, you're kind, and you have dreams of your own. You weren't just looking for a meal ticket. You were looking for a partner. I knew you could understand." "Understand?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Understand that my marriage is a lie? That I'm just a prop you used to fool a bunch of old men in a boardroom? I left someone for this, David. I tore my life apart for you." "I know," he said, and his voice was so full of genuine regret that it stopped my anger for a second. "And I will never be able to tell you how sorry I am for that."
I am so sorry.
But what I'm offering you isn't a lie. Not anymore. I crossed my arms, a pathetic shield against the truth. What are you offering me? A partnership, he said, his eyes pleading with me.
A real one.
Everything we have now, but with the truth on the table. The house, the money, the freedom to build your nonprofit into whatever you want it to be. It's all yours. No questions asked. All I need is for you to continue being my wife in public. To stand by my side at these stupid events. To smile for the cameras. In private, we can be what we've already become. Friends. Best friends. Confidants. We can build our own kind of family, you and I. One based on honesty and mutual respect. My mind was reeling. He was asking me to knowingly step into a gilded cage. To accept a life that was half performance. To give up on the idea of a romantic, all-consuming love forever. The kind of love I'd had with Arthur. Messy, chaotic, broke, but real. But then, I thought about what real had gotten me. Eviction notices. The shame of a declined credit card. The constant, grinding anxiety that we were one bad day away from losing everything. David was offering the opposite of that. He was offering complete and total security. He was offering me the chance to do good in the world, to build something that was mine, something that mattered. You said it yourself, he continued softly, seeing the conflict on my face. We're a good team. We can help each other. I can give you the life you deserve, and you can give me the freedom to just be myself, even if it's only behind closed doors. He told me about his partner, a professor named Michael he'd been with for years. He spoke of a hidden life, of stolen weekends and coded conversations, of the constant fear of being discovered and losing everything his father had built. Listening to him, I saw it. He was just as trapped as I had been, just in a different way. His cage was made of expectation and legacy. Mine had been made of poverty. The choice was laid out before me, stark and clear. I could leave. I could walk out of this enormous house with nothing but my pride and go back to a life of struggle. I'd have my integrity, but what would I eat? Where would I live? Or I could stay. I could accept this strange, modern bargain. I could trade passion for peace. I could trade a lover for a true partner. I looked at David, really looked at him. The billionaire disappeared, and I just saw a man who was asking for help, who was offering me the same in return. It wasn't the fairy tale I thought I was choosing. It was something far more complicated. And maybe something far more real. I took a deep breath, the city air feeling thin in my lungs. Okay, I said, my voice steady. I'll stay. Relief flooded his face, so potent it was almost painful to watch. But we have rules, I added, finding a strength I didn't know I had. Rule number 1, no more lies. Between us, ever. We are completely honest with each other. He nodded. Done. Rule number 2, this is a partnership of equals. My work with the nonprofit is just as important as your work as CEO. Of course, he said without hesitation. And rule number 3, I said, looking him straight in the eye. You and I, we are a team. We protect each other. From your board, from your family, from anyone who tries to come between us. A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time that night. He held out his hand. A team. I took it. His grip was firm, warm. It wasn't the hand of a lover or even a husband. It was the hand of an ally, an accomplice. We stood there for a long moment, our deal sealed, the city lights bearing witness to the strange, irrevocable contract we had just made. I had traded one dream for another. And as I stood on that balcony, I felt a strange and powerful sense of determination. I would not be a victim in this story. I was a partner, and I was going to play my part perfectly. The next 6 months were surprisingly easy. Our arrangement fell into a rhythm that felt less like a performance and more like a well-oiled partnership. My nonprofit, which I called the Harmony Project, was thriving. We were setting up after-school music and art programs in underserved neighborhoods, and I had never felt more purposeful. David was an incredible ally. He'd listened to my plans over breakfast, offering sharp, practical advice. He celebrated my small victories and helped me navigate the complicated world of fundraising. He became my closest friend. In public, we were flawless. We attended galas and charity dinners, a perfect picture of the new power couple. He'd rest his hand on the small of my back, a gesture that felt both protective and practiced. I'd laugh at his jokes, my smile feeling less fake each time. We were a team, protecting our shared secret, and there was a strange intimacy in that. In private, we were just Janet and David. We'd watch movies in the giant home theater, complaining about the plot holes. He'd tell me about the stress of the board, and I'd tell him about a talented kid at one of my centers. We built a life in the spaces between the lies. The first real crack in our carefully constructed world came at his mother's birthday party. The Scott family estate was intimidating, a place where the portraits on the walls seemed to judge you. David's sister, Catherine, cornered me by the ridiculously large fireplace. She had a smile that was all teeth. "You two just seem so perfect," she said, sipping her wine. "It's remarkable. David was always so private, so focused on work. And then you came along and swept him off his feet. He never even brought a girl home before you." Her eyes were sharp, searching for something. "Sometimes you just know," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I suppose," she continued, not letting up. "Still, I'd love to hear the story of the proposal. David is so tight-lipped about it. Was it terribly romantic?" My heart hammered against my ribs. We had never discussed a cover story for the proposal. It was a stupid oversight. David was across the room, trapped in a conversation with his father. I was on my own. "He's a man of action, not grand gestures," I said, improvising. It was quiet, private, just for us. That's what made it special. I could feel a sweat break out on my forehead. Catherine's smile tightened. "How lovely to have a moment that's just yours." She knew. She didn't know what the truth was, but she knew I was lying. She took another sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving my face. "Well, you must make him very happy. He's never seemed more stable." The word hung in the air, a clear reference to the reason he needed me in the first place. I felt like a fraud, a prop bought and paid for. Later that week, David told me he wanted me to meet someone. "Michael," he said, his voice quiet. "He wants to meet you. He needs to know I'm okay. That you're you." We met at a small, out-of-the-way bookstore cafe. Michael was a history professor with kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed a little sad. He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and deep, profound gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "For what you're doing for him. For us." It was the strangest conversation of my life. I was sitting with my husband's long-term partner, discussing my fake marriage. He told me how much David had struggled, the weight he carried. Hearing it from him made it all feel heavier. "He's a good man," I found myself saying. "We take care of each other." Michael nodded, his eyes tearing up slightly. "I know," he told me. "He calls you his partner, his real partner." I left that meeting feeling dizzy. I was happy for them, for the real love they shared, a love I was helping to protect. But seeing it up close, seeing that deep, quiet connection between two people, left a hollow ache in my chest. It was a sharp reminder of exactly what I didn't have, what I had willingly traded away. It made me think of Arthur, of the way he'd look at me when he was playing a new song, like I was the only person in the world. I pushed the thought away. I had made my choice. That night, I threw myself into my work. I was at the new downtown office for the Harmony Project, finalizing a grant proposal. The office was my sanctuary, the one place that felt completely mine. It was late, and the building was quiet. I took a break, scrolling through news articles on my phone, and then I saw it. It was on a popular music site. The headline was simple: Arthur M. Jones lands major label deal. My breath left my body. There was a photo of him, standing outside a recording studio, guitar case in hand. He looked different, more confident, a little harder around the edges, but it was him. His smile wasn't the easy, hopeful one I remembered. It was the smile of a man who had finally won, but had lost something important along the way. I clicked on the article. It talked about his raw talent, his soulful lyrics. It mentioned his debut single that was already getting airplay. The song was called The Trade. My hands started to shake. I found the song online and pressed play. His voice filled the silence of my office, rougher and more full of pain than I remembered. It was our story. Every line was a knife. He sang about cheap pasta and eviction notices, about promises of one day. He sang about a love that felt like home, and the hollow silence when that home was torn apart for a safer, colder place. He had done it. Everything he had ever promised me, everything I had stopped believing in, had come true. And I wasn't there to see it. The life I ran from had ceased to exist. In its place was the life I had told him I wanted, the one with security and success. But it was his, not mine. I had made the worst trade in history. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I wasn't just crying for him, or for us. I was crying for my own stupidity, for the girl who thought security was the same thing as happiness. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from a number I didn't recognize. My heart seized. The message had only 4 words. I know you're there. I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked to the window. My office overlooked a small, quiet side street. Down below, standing under the hazy glow of a single streetlight, was a figure. Even from 5 floors up, I knew it was Arthur. He was looking right up at my window, his phone in his hand. He was back. And he had found me. My body went cold. I stumbled back from the window, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. It was him. It was real. I hid behind the wall, my back pressed against the cool plaster, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. Arthur. Here. After all this time, after everything, he was standing on my street. Not my old street, not the one we shared. He was standing on the street that belonged to my new life, a life he knew nothing about. I couldn't go down there. I couldn't face him. What would I even say? Congratulations on the record deal. The song is great. It's a beautifully written description of how I ripped your heart out for a life that turned out to be a complete sham. The thought was so absurd, so painful, that a choked laugh escaped my throat. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor of my perfect, custom-designed office, a prisoner 5 stories up. I waited, holding my breath, until I dared to peek out the window again. The space under the streetlight was empty. He was gone, but his presence lingered, a ghost that had just reminded me it could touch the real world. I drove home on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. The city lights blurred past, a smear of gold and red. The one person I wanted to talk to, the one person who would understand the impossible mess my life had become, was David. He was my partner, my friend. He would know what to do. We were a team. We protected each other. I repeated the words in my head like a prayer. A team. When I got to the house, his car was in the driveway, along with another one I recognized. Catherine. My stomach twisted. I walked inside, the silence of the large house feeling more like an accusation than a comfort. I could hear their voices coming from David's study at the end of the hall. I started toward the sound, my shoes silent on the polished stone floors. I needed to tell him about Arthur. I needed to see a friendly face. As I got closer, I could make out their words. Catherine's voice was sharp, cutting. You can't keep this up forever, David. It's been 6 months. The board is happy, Dad is off your back. How long does the Janet experiment continue? I stopped, my hand hovering just inches from the doorframe. The Janet experiment. Is that what I was? David's voice was low, tired. It's not an experiment, Catherine. She's my wife. Oh, please, she scoffed. She's a prop. A very convincing one. I'll grant you that, but she's a means to an end. The question is, what is the end? Michael can't be happy with this. Living in the shadows while you play house with a woman you hired. He understands, David said, his voice tight with frustration. And I didn't hire her. You might as well have. You pay for her entire life. Her little charity project. Her clothes. Her car. It's a salary, David, just with better benefits. So, tell me, when does her contract expire? My blood turned to ice. Contract. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I leaned my head against the wall, trying to breathe. My ears were ringing. There is no contract, David said firmly. Don't lie to me, Catherine snapped. I know Dad's lawyers. They wouldn't leave a single thing to chance with a deal this important. There's a document somewhere, and I want to know what it says. What happens when you don't need her anymore? What's the exit strategy? There was a long pause. I held my breath, praying he would defend me, defend us. That he would tell her she was wrong, that our friendship was real, that this was more than a business deal. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. All the warmth was gone. It was the voice of a CEO discussing a business problem. The arrangement was for 2 years. That's the minimum required to secure the voting shares from the trust. After that, we can file for a quiet, amicable divorce. It's all been structured. She gets a settlement. A very generous one. She's taken care of. Taken care of. I felt the air leave my lungs. The entire world tilted on its axis. My partnership. My friendship. My team.
It was all a lie.
It wasn't a strange, modern marriage built on mutual respect. It was a 2-year lease. I was a temporary solution. The Harmony Project, the thing that had given me purpose, was it just part of my severance package? A hobby to keep me occupied and out of his hair until my expiration date? Every moment of our friendship replayed in my mind, but the color was gone. The late-night talks, his advice, his encouragement. It wasn't a friend supporting a friend. It was an employer managing an employee. He wasn't my partner. He was my handler. He had studied me, found my weakness, my desire for security and purpose, and he had used it. He had built me a beautiful cage and convinced me it was a kingdom. Catherine's voice cut through my haze. And she just agreed to this? A 2-year fake marriage. She doesn't know about the timeline, David admitted, and that was the final blow. The last bit of ground crumbled away beneath my feet. She thinks this is indefinite.
It was better that way.
Simpler. Less for her to worry about. Less for me to worry about. He had lied to my face. Not just a lie of omission about his sexuality, but a calculated, deliberate deception about the very foundation of our life together. He hadn't seen a partner. He had seen a problem that money could solve for a fixed period of time. And I, the girl who left a man for being financially insecure, had been bought and paid for. I backed away from the door, my movements stiff and robotic. I couldn't breathe. I was going to be sick. I stumbled into the cavernous living room, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The same lights we had looked at the night he told me his truth and offered me a partnership. It was all a script. He had played his part perfectly. I was completely, utterly alone. David, the man who I thought was my closest confidant, was the architect of my humiliation. And Arthur was a world away, writing songs about the woman who sold her soul, not knowing she hadn't even read the fine print on the deal. I had no one, no money of my own, no real home. I was an asset with a ticking clock. A cold, hard anger began to form in the pit of my stomach, replacing the shock. It was a slow-burning rage. He had called me brilliant. He had underestimated me. I was a paralegal. I knew about contracts. I knew about loopholes and leverage. And I knew that somewhere in this big, empty house, there was a document that laid out the terms of my own destruction. I just had to find it. The game had been going on for 6 months without me even knowing I was a player. Well, now I knew. And if David Scott thought I was just going to quietly serve my term and collect my prize at the end, he had made a very, very big mistake. I didn't move until I heard the front door close. Catherine was gone. David's footsteps went upstairs, toward his wing of the house. The coast was clear. My rage was a cold, quiet thing now, a sharp piece of glass in my gut. I walked into his study, the room where we'd had our late-night talks, the room where our friendship was born. It felt like a crime scene. I knew where to look. He had a personal safe hidden behind a false panel of books on the shelf. He'd shown it to me once, a gesture of trust that now felt like a sick joke. Everything important is in here, he'd said. My fingers trembled as I pulled the correct book, the panels swinging open silently. I spun the dial, the numbers clicking into place. My own birthday. The irony was suffocating. Inside, there were stacks of documents. I found the folder labeled with our names almost immediately. My hands were steady as I pulled it out. It wasn't a contract. It was a prenuptial agreement. The one his lawyer had walked me through a few days before the wedding. I remembered the lawyer's calm voice, the pages and pages of legal language that had made my eyes glaze over. I had been so focused on leaving Arthur, on starting my new life, that I had just signed where he told me to sign. Standard procedure, he'd said. A formality to protect the company assets. I sank into David's leather desk chair and started to read. And there it was on page 12, section 4, under the heading Term of Agreement. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. The marital union was established for a minimum term of 24 months. Upon the conclusion of this term, a no-fault dissolution could be initiated by either party. There were clauses about public conduct, about confidentiality, about a severance payment to be made to me upon the successful completion of the term. A payment for services rendered. My work, my dream, the Harmony Project, was in there too. It was listed as a subsidiary entity of Scott Enterprises Charitable Foundation. I wasn't the founder. I was the acting director. My position was contingent on the marriage. When the marriage ended, so did my role. I own nothing. Not the name, not the offices, not the programs I had built from the ground up. It was all his. Every late night, every child's smile, every bit of hope I had poured into that project belonged to him. It was a company perk, a distraction to keep the merchandise happy. I felt a wave of nausea, so strong I had to grip the edge of the desk. I had been played so completely, so expertly, that I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. I did neither. I sat there in the silence, the cold legal papers in my hand a testament to my own stupidity. I waited for him. I didn't know how long. I just sat there in his chair, in the dark, until he came looking for me. The door opened, and he flicked on the light. He saw me at his desk, the folder open in front of me, and for a split second, I saw panic in his eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the calm, controlled mask of the CEO. "Janet," he said, his voice even. "You shouldn't be in here. Shouldn't I?" I held up the papers. "It seems I should have been in here a long time ago, with a lawyer of my own." He sighed and closed the door, leaning against it. He didn't look sorry. He looked tired, like an employee who had to deal with a difficult but predictable problem.
"I was going to tell you," he said.
"When?" I shot back, my voice shaking with a rage that was finally boiling over. "A week before my contract was up? Was you going to give me my 2 weeks' notice?" "It wasn't like that," he said, his voice still infuriatingly calm. "This was the only way to make it work. It protected both of us. It guaranteed you a future, a very comfortable one. It guaranteed me nothing. I was on my feet now, the pages crumpled in my fist. It made me a temporary employee in my own life. My work, David. The Harmony Project. You let me believe it was mine. I gave you the resources to build it," he said, and his tone shifted. It became colder, sharper. The friend was gone. This was the man who ran a billion-dollar company. I gave you a life most people can only dream of. A beautiful home, unlimited funds, a chance to pursue your passion without worrying about a single bill. For 2 years of your time. It's the best deal you will ever get. The transaction. That's all it ever was." He saw the fury on my face, and he took a step forward. "Listen to me, Janet. You have 2 choices. You can continue as we are for the next 18 months. You play your part, you smile for the cameras, and at the end, you walk away with a settlement that means you will never have to work another day in your life. You can start a dozen nonprofits of your own. Or," he paused, letting the threat hang in the air, "you can make this difficult.
"You can try to fight me."
But you signed a non-disclosure agreement. If you break it, my lawyers will spend the rest of your life making sure you have nothing. No settlement, no reputation, nothing. I will bury you. Is that what you want?" The choice was a punch to the stomach. a gilded cage or a ditch. Both were prisons. My entire life, my entire future, was laid out in those two terrible options. I had no leverage, no power. I had signed it all away for a dream that was never mine. I stared at him, this man who I thought was my friend, my partner. He was a stranger, a monster in a perfectly tailored suit. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He had already won. So that's it, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a hollow, aching despair. I'm just your prisoner for the next year and a half. That's a very dramatic way of putting it, he said coolly. I thought of it as a partnership. But since you've made it clear you can no longer be trusted, some things will have to change. The trust is gone. He walked over to the desk and picked up his phone. He typed for a moment. My own phone buzzed on the desk. A notification from my bank. The account connected to the credit card he had given me had been closed. The company cards have been frozen, he said, not looking at me. All expenses for the Harmony project will now need to be approved directly by my office. And I think it's best if you step back from your director role for now. We'll bring in someone to oversee the transition. You've done great work, but it's a distraction you no longer need. He took it all.
Just like that.
In the space of 30 seconds, he stripped me of my freedom, my purpose, and my dignity. He left me with nothing but the dress on my back and a room in his house. You can stay here, of course, he said, his voice softening into a grotesque imitation of concern. As long as you remember our arrangement. Behave, Janet. It's the smart play. He turned and walked out of the study, leaving me alone in the silent room. The papers lay on the desk, a blueprint of my own destruction. I was trapped. More trapped than I had ever been in that tiny apartment with Arthur. At least there, I had been loved. At least there, I had been a person. Here, I was just an asset whose contract had been breached. I sank to the floor, the cold reality of my situation crashing down on me. I had lost everything. And the worst part was, I had handed him the knife myself. For the first 3 days, I behaved. I was a ghost in my own life. I woke up in the silent, empty bedroom. I walked through the cavernous house that was no longer a home, but a holding cell. I ate the perfect meals the housekeeper left for me, food that tasted like ash in my mouth. I didn't speak to David. I barely saw him. He was a shadow passing in the hall, a closed door at the end of a long corridor. The silence was his weapon. It was meant to break me, to remind me that I was completely and utterly dependent on him. And for 3 days, it worked. Despair was a heavy blanket, and I let it suffocate me. On the 4th day, something shifted. I was staring at my reflection in the black glass of the television screen, a stranger with hollow eyes looking back at me, when his words echoed in my head. You're brilliant, Janet. He had said it to flatter me, to manipulate me, but what if he was right? I had been a paralegal. A good one. I was smart, detail-oriented. I understood the cold logic of the law. I had spent years of my life reading documents just like the one that now defined my prison sentence. My anger, which had burned out into despair, reignited. But this time, it wasn't a hot, useless fire. It was a cold, sharp point. That night, when the house was still, I crept back into his study. The prenup was exactly where I had left it, on the corner of his polished desk. This time, I didn't read it as a betrayed wife. I read it as a paralegal looking for a kill shot. I spread the pages out, my fingers tracing the dense blocks of text. His lawyers were good, very good. Every clause was ironclad. The non-disclosure was airtight. The terms of the settlement were clear. The section about the Harmony project was brutal in its precision, defining me as a temporary director with no ownership rights. There were no obvious loopholes, no careless mistakes. I read it once, then twice. On the 3rd read-through, I stopped focusing on what I had lost and started focusing on the obligations. On his obligations. Most of it was financial, which he had clearly met. But then I found it. Section 7. Mutual covenants. It was mostly standard stuff about maintaining the public image of the marriage. But buried in subsection B was a single, beautiful sentence. Both parties agreed to provide mutual support, both public and private, to foster a stable and harmonious marital environment for the duration of the agreement. Harmonious marital environment. Mutual support. He had broken it. The moment he froze my accounts, the moment he stripped me of my role at the nonprofit, the moment he threatened to bury me, he wasn't providing support. He was declaring war. He had breached the contract first. It was a small crack, a tiny hairline fracture in his perfect legal fortress, but it was something. It was leverage. A breach of contract could, in theory, void the whole agreement, including the non-disclosure clause. My heart started beating faster. It was a long shot. His lawyers would argue that support meant the roof over my head and the food on my plate. They would say he had every right to manage his own financial assets as he saw fit. But I knew better. The intent of the clause was clear, and his intent in cutting me off was equally clear. It was a punishment. It was a threat. It was the opposite of fostering a harmonious environment. I needed help. I had no money, no phone he wasn't monitoring, no access to a computer that wasn't tracked. I was an island. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I left the house on foot. I told the housekeeper I was going for a walk to clear my head. I walked for 2 miles, my mind racing, until I found a small convenience store. I used the last $20 I had in my old wallet to buy a prepaid phone card and used the store's grubby payphone. My hands shook as I dialed the number for my old law firm. I asked for Mr. Henderson. He was my old boss, a tough, overworked man who had always treated me with a grudging respect. He had been disappointed when I quit. "Janet," he said, his voice gruff and surprised. "What's wrong? You sound like you've seen a ghost." Tears pricked my eyes. Just hearing a familiar voice, a voice from my old life, was almost too much. "I'm in trouble, sir," I said, my voice cracking. I need to ask you a hypothetical legal question." I didn't use names. I just laid out the facts. A prenuptial agreement with a fixed term.
A non disclosure clause.
And a specific covenant for mutual support that one party had clearly violated through punitive financial actions. I talked for 5 minutes straight, the legal language I hadn't used in months coming back to me like a forgotten prayer. There was a long silence on the other end of a line. I could hear him breathing, thinking. "Janet," he finally said, his voice serious. "Whoever this person is, they have a case. It's not a slam dunk. It's an uphill battle against a mountain of money. They'll try to bury her in motions and legal fees. But a breach is a breach. If she can prove his actions were punitive and not just fiscal management, she could argue the entire agreement is void." A wave of relief, so powerful, it made me dizzy, washed over me. I wasn't crazy. I had something. What does she do? "She needs a shark," he said bluntly. "I can't touch this, Janet. You know who she's up against, and my firm can't afford that kind of war. But there are people who can. People who live for this kind of fight." He gave me a name. A woman. A lawyer famous for taking on impossible cases against powerful men. "Tell her to mention my name." And Janet. "Yes. Be smart. Be careful. And whatever you do, don't let him know you're coming." I hung up the phone, my entire body buzzing with a new kind of energy. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was purpose. I walked out of that convenience store not as a prisoner, but as a combatant. David had made his move, thinking he had already won the game. He didn't know I was about to change all the rules. He thought I was a prop he could control. He forgot I was a paralegal. He forgot I knew how to fight. He had built me a gilded cage, but he'd made a critical mistake. He'd left the lock-picking tools inside. I walked back toward that enormous house on the hill, but I wasn't walking back to my prison. I was walking back to the battlefield. The Scott Foundation annual charity gala was the biggest social event of the season. And this year, the crown jewel of the evening was the Harmony Project. My project.
My passion.
My prison. I stood at the back of the grand ballroom, watching David on stage. He looked every bit the charming, philanthropic CEO. He was talking about community, about giving back, about the importance of art. Then he smiled that practiced camera-ready smile. And, of course, None of this would be possible without the heart and soul of the project, he said, his voice echoing through the massive room. My incredible wife, Janet. She has poured her entire being into this, and I am endlessly proud to be her partner. The crowd of wealthy, important people applauded politely. They were applauding a lie. A ghost. He was talking about the woman he thought was locked away in his glass house on the hill, the employee he had effectively fired. He hadn't seen me in 2 weeks. After our confrontation, I had simply vanished from the house, leaving him to wonder if I had run, or if I was just hiding in another wing. He had no idea what I'd been doing. He had no idea I was coming. I started walking. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor, a quiet drumbeat counting down to the end of his world. Asterisk, you can make this difficult. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. If you break it, my lawyers will spend the rest of your life making sure you have nothing. I will bury you. Asterisk. Then the second recording. The one I got when I went back to the house one last time, asking him why he lied. Asterisk, she doesn't know about the timeline. Asterisk, his recorded voice said, the same words he spoke to Catherine. Asterisk, it was better that way. Simpler. Less for her to worry about. Asterisk. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was deafening. David stood frozen, his face ashen.
He was exposed.
Humiliated. All the money and power in the world couldn't hide him now. It turns out, I said, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed, that our contract had another clause. A clause about mutual support in a harmonious marital environment. Threatening to bury your wife isn't very supportive. It is, in fact, a breach of contract. A breach which makes the entire agreement, including that little non-disclosure clause, completely void. I let that sink in. I was free, and he knew it. So, I am here tonight to announce that I am stepping down as the director of the Harmony Project, I said. The crowd gasped again. David's eyes pleaded with me. This was his worst nightmare. A public scandal that would destroy his carefully crafted image. And, in its place, I am launching a new foundation. It's called the Phoenix Project, because it's rising from the ashes of a life built on lies. I smiled. A real, genuine smile. And I'm happy to say, it has already been fully funded by a group of investors who believe in second chances. My work will continue. My dream was never for sale. I looked out at the audience, at the sea of shocked faces, at the flashing cameras of the press who were now scrambling to the front. My gaze went past them all, to the back of the room. I found Arthur's eyes. He wasn't watching me with pity or anger anymore. He was looking at me with a deep, profound respect. He finally understood. He finally saw the fighter I had been forced to become. I placed the microphone back in its stand, the sound echoing the final nail in the coffin of David Scott's reputation. I turned and walked off that stage, not looking back. I didn't need to. I could feel the wreckage behind me. I had walked into that ballroom a secret, a prop, a wife for hire. I was walking out as Janet Henry, founder, fighter,
Free.
I didn't wait for the applause. I didn't wait for the questions. I just walked, my head held high, through the parting sea of shocked faces. My destination was the pillar at the back of the room. Arthur didn't move. He just watched me come, his expression unreadable. When I finally stood in front of him, the noise of the ballroom seemed to fade into a dull roar. So, he said, his voice low and even. That was quite the performance. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't praise.
It was just a statement of fact.
It wasn't a performance, Arthur. I said, my voice barely a whisper. It was me taking my life back. He nodded slowly, his eyes searching my face. He was looking for the girl he used to know, the one who cried over past due bills and believed his promises of one day. She wasn't there anymore. He saw the woman who had just taken down a billionaire on live television. The song, I said, the words catching in my throat. The trade. I heard it. I figured you might, he said. A flicker of the old pain crossed his face. I wrote it because I thought you sold your soul for a fairy tale. I thought you were a princess trapped in a castle. Turns out you were a soldier planning a prison break. A tear I didn't know was there slipped down my cheek. I'm so sorry, Arthur. Not for leaving. I was drowning, and I had to save myself. I'm sorry for the way I did it.
I'm sorry you lied.
He reached out, not to touch me, but just held his hand in the space between us. It was an offering of peace. You don't have to apologize. I get it now. We were both just trying to survive. He finally let a small, real smile touch his lips. What you did up there, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The validation I had been seeking wasn't in the money or the security. It was right here, in the eyes of the man I had hurt the most. What now? I asked. Now, he said, finally letting his hand rest gently on my arm. We get out of here. We walked out of that ballroom together, leaving the wreckage of David's life behind us. The news cycle was brutal. The story wasn't just about a messy divorce. It was about corporate fraud, deception, and the gross misuse of power. David Scott wasn't a charming visionary anymore. He was a liar who had used a black woman as a prop to secure a business deal. The board of Scott Enterprises, terrified of the public relations nightmare, demanded his resignation within 48 hours. His father, in a move to save the company, publicly condemned his son's actions and cut all ties. David lost everything. The CEO title, the family trust, the reputation he had built his entire life on protecting. I heard later, through the gossip columns, that his partner Michael had left him too. The public humiliation was one thing, but the depth of the deception, the willingness to use another human being so cruelly, was something he couldn't forgive. David became a ghost, disappearing from the world he had tried so hard to conquer. He got exactly what he deserved, a lonely, quiet life with nothing but his money to keep him company. There was no lawsuit. There was no fight. My lawyer sent one letter, and his lawyers settled immediately. They gave me everything I asked for, not because they were generous, but because they knew a court case would expose even more of their secrets. They just wanted me to go away. And I did. I went to work. The Phoenix Project was born, not in a fancy high-rise office, but in a rented storefront in the same neighborhood I used to live in with Arthur. The settlement money provided the foundation, but the real funding came from a surprising place. One of my first major investors was Arthur. He took the advance from his record deal, the money that was supposed to buy him a fancy house, and he invested it in me. In my dream. It's a better investment, he'd said, signing the check. Houses are just wood and nails. This is hope. A year has passed since that night. My life is nothing like it was. It's not a struggle, and it's not a performance. It's just real. The Phoenix Project has 2 locations now. I spend my days surrounded by the sounds of kids learning to play the guitar, paint their first pictures, and write their first poems. I'm not a director in a glass office. I'm on the floor with them, my hands covered in paint, my heart full. This is my security. This is my success. It's a feeling no amount of money could ever buy. Arthur and I found our way back to each other. It was slow, cautious. We had to unlearn our old patterns. He had to learn to see me as an equal partner, not someone to be saved. And I had to learn that true strength isn't about escaping hardship, but about facing it together. Our new apartment is bigger than the old one, but it has the same feeling. It's filled with music, but now it's also filled with peace. He's on the couch right now, strumming his guitar. He's working on a new song. This one isn't about heartbreak. It's about forgiveness. It's about building a new home out of the ashes of an old one. He looks up and catches me watching him, and he smiles. It's that old, easy smile. The one that says, I see you. The one I thought I'd lost forever. It's funny, isn't it? How your life can take such wild, unexpected turns. You think you know what you want, what happiness is supposed to look like. I thought it was a life without struggle. But I was wrong. Happiness isn't the absence of problems. It's the strength to face them. I had to walk through a nightmare to figure that out, but I wouldn't trade a single moment of it. I found my own voice. I found my own power. I found my way home. And that's the story. That's how I traded it all for a fairy tale, only to find my real happily ever after in the ruins. What do you think? Did I make the right choices in the end? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Every story has two sides, and I'm sure some of you might see things differently. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed the story, if it made you feel something, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me keep making these for you. We have so many more stories to tell. Stories about the complicated, messy, and beautiful ways our lives get tangled up. I think you'll really like the one we have planned for next week. It's about a man who discovers the son he's been raising for 15 years isn't his. It's a tough one. Until then, take care of yourselves and remember to be the hero of your own story. I'll see you next time.